one agenda item? Are we doing minutes tonight? No?
I just handed one down so we can.
Okay, great. So basically what we're gonna do tonight, we'll kind of go over the schedule at the end, but tonight what we want to do is we want to run through where we are as of today with our revenue numbers, and then we want to run through all of our expense categories with some of the suggestions that we had kind of started tossing around, and then get some updates from a few of the liaisons on some conversations about some of those suggested adjustments. And then that'll help us get a little closer to our deficit reduction. I don't think we're in bad shape, which is good. And we've got a little bit of time still to kind of work through, so hope is that we kind of run through that. If we have any questions, we have, time to go back and do that. Then at the end, we can look at minutes and then talk about the schedule for the next remaining weeks of the month and what we need to accomplish by when. So with that, you want to do revenue first?
Well, I haven't changed any of the revenue numbers yet. I can go to the revenue numbers. The revenue numbers, I am not recommending any changes at this point, except the one from conservation where they increased the contribution from NOI. So that will go up to, gotta go back down and see what they changed it to, 6590 from my original projection of 4,500. So that added a few dollars to offset their
That'll
budget.
cover the paper clips.
Yeah, it's really not gonna solve the major problem. So I haven't really changed any other article at this time dramatically. That's gonna help you,
That's okay.
okay?
Are there any questions on revenue that we haven't hit in the last couple meetings? That's, well, it'll continue to be refined as we get closer.
Too far. So, yeah, who we go far? Well, that's interesting. So we're still okay at the moment for what we got. The governor's budget is what we're, looking at most of our funds on. I haven't changed it because, the House budget can come in, the Senate budget's still yet to come, the compromise is still yet to come. The only thing I'm pretty comfortable with after talking to the state rep is that our education number won't slip from what it's been promised to be. So that aid to education is going to help us this year a lot, so.
When do we expect when's the next update to the cherry sheet due? Probably not until,
Well, it would have come today, but coronavirus is sort of nudging out the activity. So I wish we could do something besides coronavirus, but at the moment, that's where we're at. So that leads me to changes that you guys want to make.
yep, okay. So we have a handful of categories, departments and categories that we can talk about. Why don't we jump over to budgets by department? And then we'll literally just start at the top, I think. And I just lost my mouse. Seriously.
So first change that you put in is the line 16.
So, in the selectmen's budget, the town administrator, Mr. Noble, has two asks that he'd like us to consider. One for an intern, he had mentioned them during his presentation, and the other was for special projects, basically. I just kind of threw them in, I didn't give them official titles.
No, that's fine.
Threw them in, it could be kind of consulting special projects. So I threw those in.
Agent classification, personnel, capital articles, that we can parse some of this out for inexpensive money and hire consultants that would come in and just do that. I think when I made my presentation, we talked about some towns hiring an assistant town administrator to do these things, and that means insurances, retirement, et cetera. So I'd rather not do that. I would rather just parse out projects. And the other argument I would make would be that if you hire somebody, their skills may not necessarily be across the board. So this would allow me to pick somebody that can do capital, somebody that could do wage and classification, somebody can do this, and just cherry pick, if you will, available talent. So rather than hiring somebody, not that you could hire somebody for 26, but this is just minimal money to get some of the projects done. So
So are you on the selectmen? Is that what the,
this is, yeah, I'm the
Department head
selectman.
salary?
That's who I am, right here.
that's, okay.
Right here, sorry.
What's the 145?
That's
you,
me.
You and your group?
Yep.
You? Okay, cool.
Okay. And
So,
that's Lee and Rebecca. Okay, and that is Rebecca. And these are all three of us. Okay.
so I left them in, I put them in, and then if, you know, if anybody has any questions or concerns, or if it gets down to crunch time, you know, we can revisit any of these items.
Right now you have them,
I have it as a proposed to increase.
oh, okay, I see the column, yeah.
Why
I
does
just
the,
realized
why
I
does the
missed that on
clerical
the summary.
salaries go up 7.75%?
You got a step and a COLA for both employees this year.
What does that mean? They just get more money just
Yes.
because?
Yes, they've survived another year.
Okay. Not doing anything
Oh, I did
different, just
include
give
it.
them money.
Okay,
Okay.
all
Now
right.
you're getting cynical.
I'm just asking what they do different.
Okay.
All right.
Laura, as we're talking about this, where are we revenue versus expense right now? What's the,
The delta?
Yeah.
As of right now, the delta is a little over $400,000.
We short.
So,
400.
yeah, so 400,000 before any of these proposed adjustments. So as we'll go through, I've got kind of a running tally on another summary sheet of kind of the proposed back and forth to kind of close that gap. So we'll kind of go through those so this would be, you know, obviously an add. Okay, so going down.
Line 44.
I gotta keep up with you here. Okay, the next item that we had some discussion on, and again, this is a number that we have a little flexibility with, is our reserve fund. So last year, we budgeted $135,000. We haven't used much of it at all this year. I think the only thing is the cruisers, the only thing we've tapped into, so obviously we still have a little bit of time left. But we talked about, you know, that probably should be a little higher. Brian's recommendation was, what was the percentage?
200,000.
200,000 as a percentage of
Yeah, 0.5% of the
half a
budget.
percent.
Yeah.
You know, we started with 200,000, which isn't unreasonable. One of the things that we are talking with all the department heads this year is about, you know, budgeting as realistic as possible, with the understanding that we'd be here to help if something were to go drastically wrong. You know, we keep making that promise, and I worry a little bit that, you know, we might have a line at our door. So we have 200,000 as of right now. I kind of put in a play number to reduce that maybe to 175, which is, I still think, a reasonable number. So right now, the proposed reduction would be 25,000 to bring that down to the 175. And again, we have a little bit of, that can be a little bit of a play number. You know, not that we play with it too much, but, you know, give or take.
There's some elasticity.
Absolutely. So I don't know if everybody wants to go through just kind of the other categories. I mean, we've kind of gone through the other departments and didn't really have a lot of thoughts and comments on some of the other departments. We've kind of picked out the ones that we've been talking about. Down to line 292 next.
I mean, 292.
292. So DPW is an area that we did have some discussions with, or about, and Dan has been in discussion with John Haynes. So one of the suggested line item adjustments is down at the end of general expenses, which is a building projects line item. Do you want to comment on that?
This is a line item that is a summary of the different requests that have come in from other departments in town. But there was an unexpended amount in 19 and in fiscal year 20. projected to be under budget, so we recommended a reduction of $5,000 from the budget request of $20,000.
Any thoughts, concerns, questions?
Why not cut it in half?
I think it's a good start. It's below where he's been, and he does base it on requests that he's gotten throughout from different departments in town. So I felt, we can discuss it. I felt like it was a start. We did cut a couple other line items from him as well, so
You're seeing such an increase in all materials too, that
that's true too.
That's-
Yep.
Mhm.
we would maybe wanna cut it too much, so 5 probably seems good.
Yep.
One question I kinda had going across all these, like, he's got $30,000 for communications equipment. And it seems like every department has that, that's for the school, I guess, but it seems like, can you just buy them all cell phones and just, and communicate that way? I don't understand.
We do,
You do?
and we buy them radios, so that's what
Radios
that
and
number
cell
is.
phones?
Yep.
Why do they have both?
Well, you wanna talk to the whole crew, you talk on the
Yeah.
radio, and you wanna talk to you one-on-one, you call them.
During a
cell phone.
snowstorm, you're not, you
could
know,
have
you
a
got,
conference call, couldn't you? That's-
Not
well,
really.
not when they're driving,
No, not when you're driving. You want the radio.
yeah.
Okay.
Plus the fact they can talk on the police band, the fire band, DPW band, school band, so they can move between the
Do they all need their own bands?
the police, fire, yes, oh, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Why is that?
You dispatch police on police frequencies, the other police departments monitor the police department. You don't share the fire. Fire separates on their own band. When they go to mutual aid, the fire's on fire's bands. In other words, if
All
we
the fire
respond-
departments in the area?
Then there's
all
the
fire departments in the areas
confidential
are on fire department frequencies.
Yep.
There's a county-wide mutual aid frequency for fire department, county-wide mutual aid for police department. But the way the current radios work is Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, Hanson can listen to our police band,
Right.
and the fire departments share, can listen to each other. But in our town, our police and fire could listen to each other, but they're on a separate band.
Okay.
Okay. This jumps around a little just because of the way the departments are, so the next one is down on line 322. So, health insurance, so, Brian's hoping that we will have a final number by our next meeting. So what I've done is just kind of taken a swag at a rate increase. I believe, what did I say, I was at 7? I estimated I was at 7, that we were gonna hopefully be around 7%. So this adjustment is taking a 7% increase into
It was 10,
consideration.
right?
We originally, Brian had put 10 in, yeah. So this is a little wing and a prayer. We're hoping that it will,
We got the final rates today. The average is about 4.9, but
we have to,
we actually calculate it because the Tufts plan went up 7%, another plan went up 3%, so we literally have to price out everybody's plan,
Smooth it.
so, and each percentage point equates about $40,000 in expense. So this might give us some help once the final calculation is done as well. So, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed big time.
Recreation Commission.
Recreation Commission. So we had talked with the Recreation Commission a couple weeks ago. We're actually waiting to meet with them in person and have some, a little more in-depth conversation with us. They had requested a fairly substantial increase. We had expressed the need to see a bit more of a fleshed-out business plan, and then the thought that even if we didn't make if they weren't able to do that in time for this budget cycle, that, it's certainly something that we could still consider mid-year. So, the question comes down to, they've had a very minuscule $250 budget for a long time. And the question kind of remains, do we want to give them a little bit more to start some of that planning and work and, or not?
I think you put in.
I had like a $750 increase.
Reasonable to get started.
Yeah,
I don't think we're gonna
but
go-
it certainly is not by any means, something that's required or we have to do. I didn't know what Evan's thoughts were. Like I said, we're gonna hopefully meet with them soon.
Right,
I'm just not sure.
right.
It'll all flesh out in time. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
No, I think that the biggest thing is going forward that they have developed some sort of a plan of attack, and then,
Yeah,
you know, give us a better sense of where they're going, and we can direct funds accordingly.
yeah,
But I think it's certainly, you know, an area where some spending could certainly happen and be a benefit to the town. But again, without better direction, it's hard to
yeah,
say, you know, 750, 7,500, 75,000, you know, who knows?
yeah. Good point. So again, we have that there as a holder. If everybody's comfortable with it, we certainly, like, you know, when it comes down time to have the final numbers in the vote, we can kind of look at it then.
Well, it's a $55 million budget, right? So it's $250 is like .000.
Rounding error.
Exchange.
Chasing pennies on the floor.
Yep. All
Well,
right.
it will be actually at the end.
Those pennies will matter. Police department, so we actually, I went back to the police department with the recent announcement of Chief Allen leaving his position, and then the shifts that are taking place on an interim basis. I asked them to take a look at their budget for next year, understanding that if the process moves fairly quickly, even if it did, that the assumption would be that a new chief would probably not come in at the same rate as the outgoing chief, and similarly, that if there was a shift to the deputy chief, et cetera, that there might be some shifting of the budget that could happen there. At a preliminary look, they did come back and say, yes, they could probably guesstimate, because again, without contracts, you don't know, they could guesstimate probably about a $25,000 savings. So I've asked them to break it out for us by line item, but they didn't have that done yet. So right now, I just kind of threw it in that on the one chief's line, just so we could at least account for it. So we're thinking that that'll be about a $25,000 savings. And again, with the understanding that we're here to help should, you know, when the shifting all finally happens and lands, that, you know, we're there to support them.
Why does the dispatcher go up 28%? That seems like a big rate of increase.
So if you remember from their presentation, that's just going live, so it's a whole new slew of FTEs and the whole central dispatch between police and fire. It's all part of that presentation that they gave us.
Yeah,
So-
they must have missed that. But, so does the fire department have that line item as well?
For the moment, we're gonna,
Yes, we're gonna-
when we're finished with the budget considerations, we're gonna break out dispatch and put it in its own department. So
Yeah.
that we can actually, we don't have it split between police and fire.
Yeah.
It'll all be in one.
So you should definitely go back and watch the video on that one, because that one was,
Good.
one of the longest
If
ones.
it doesn't save money, why are we doing it?
It will save money in the long run, but
Long run.
it's you know,
Instead of paying a police officer to do
you're
dispatch,
paying civilians.
paying a fire officer to do dispatch, you have civilians doing dispatch, which will in the wrong line. Free up a fireman, free up a policeman,
And how long does it take to pay off?
probably about 3 years.
Because
And-
it's like the patrolmen go up too.
Yep,
5%.
so they were down body, so I would definitely encourage you to watch the presentation, because there's a tremendous amount of good information that came out of that really long meeting. So we'll finalize the adjustments on the line items for this by the time we do this next, but for now, that's about the number that they're coming back to us with, which I think is reasonable.
One of the things that I would like to keep in mind, and obviously it assumes that there are some shekels left over when all is said and done, but I think that, following up on what
Yep.
the communication you had with the deputy chief, I asked him a couple of questions myself, relative to, you know, what's the status of the funded but not hired hire, and apparently that's in the process. I also think, however, that one of the things that would greatly benefit, particularly in a time of transition now, is, as Chief Allen had described to us, the sort of revamping of the command structure a little bit and adding that lieutenant position in there, which I know would cost something, but if it were doable, that would be something that I would like to look at.
Yeah. And I wanted to tag on to that, because one of the things that your question actually made me think of something else. So in thinking about not only what are we doing this year, I also want to always have our eye to next year, and I'm worried.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm worried that next year is going to be not as fun as this year. You know, this year's been fun. It's been a blast. Next year, I think, is going to be really, really different scenario, and I'm worried about growth that is happening right now. And Joe kind of pointed out, so civilian dispatch even being one of those areas, we're adding some bodies, and for good reason, to free up and get our people out on the road where they need to be, where we need those resources. But we've got to be able to sustain these resources, right? So any new ads, and we talked with the school department, and
Same
they
thing,
same
absolutely.
exact scenario, that
No
they're
question.
they're funding new positions.
I
with
just look at
one-time
this
money.
as I say, a time when there is a transition at the top.
Yeah.
Maybe a good time to add that in there. I understand there's cost. You're bumping a sergeant presumably to a lieutenant, you're bumping a patrolman to a sergeant, and you're hiring a new patrolman. So, I mean, they're.
Yeah, the trickle effect. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, no,
But,
absolutely.
No, I mean, if it's there, I think that would be a place that I would certainly look to
Agreed,
put a few extra dollars.
okay. So that was what we came out, okay, so going down to fire. So fire, we did have some conversation, and I forgot Dave wasn't gonna be here tonight. The chief actually did come in and speak with Brian after he accosted me in the produce section.
Paranoia.
Because I think we had kind of had enough of a general sense that we probably needed to go back and take some second looks at some of his line items. And he did come in and give Brian some of what he thought he could do. And Dave did go back and discuss with him, just to make sure that we had an understanding of what it was they were cutting, or reducing, I should say. I think the chief was comfortable. I think safe to say that you were comfortable, and Dave went and had that conversation. So as liaison, I think he felt that these were very appropriate adjustments to the budget. One thing to point out here, I think his total expense reductions were about $46,000. However, we do, just a point of reference to note that he did also increase the contribution of the ambulance fund, originally $685.
Yeah.
Now $715. So it was the $46,000 on the expense side, and increased of revenue, ambulance revenue as well.
Why does the compensation go up 15%? That's a lot.
What do you,
Total additional compensation, 14.95% over year.
Because we've actually
15.
filled the shift. That was one of the things he said in his presentation, he wanted to fill that shift.
Right.
So
oh, you're talking total additional compensation, 50?
Yeah.
So all these are contractual. So if you see something that's really, really high, like, EMT school cover, that's now part of the requirements. So again, he goes into very great detail on all of these, and most of these are contractual.
Right, but I mean, is this sustainable if we're gonna pay him an extra 15% every year?
In the ambulance, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the one area.
Is it sustainable? Yes.
It is?
Yes.
Really? The
Yes.
fire department salaries
Yes.
to go up 15% every year.
Well,
it's not
salaries aren't going up.
15%, and they're
That's
not
what
going up every
compensation
year.
is, right?
Okay.
Or you can
It's
call it
gone
what
up
you want.
because of the staffing level. But yes, because the staffing includes the ambulance, and the ambulance runs are up, the revenue of the ambulance is up, he can sustain it. It's really the only department you can say generates an operating income
Right.
that covers his
It's really a
expenses.
for-profit ambulance
I
service.
never would say that in a public meeting.
Well, but it is. Okay,
It's a very profitable business,
right.
and it's paid for by your insurance. So we
Which
thank
I
you
pay
very
for,
much.
right. It just seems like that's a lot of money to spend on additional compensation, and it's gonna be like that every year.
No.
All right, so he has some other, if you just scroll down just a little bit, there's some additional.
There's an additional line in the clerical salaries, an additional $3,140. In the personnel bylaw, there's the additional longevity payment, and this clerk has become eligible for that.
Great. I think the other ones are fairly reasonable. He's going to go on things like callback line. He's just going to, I don't want to say short shift himself, but basically we'll just not call back in as much as he would have liked to. He cut his training, he cut telephone, and he reduced fire safety equipment. He also reduced ambulance repair and maintenance by a very small amount. So overall, like I mentioned, his reductions were a little over $46,000 and increased ambulance revenue at the same time. All right, let's see. I'm skipping some of the small departments that we didn't have anything. School, actually, Brian, I meant to ask you, regional voc.
You got a question on line 600?
I know I did.
Okay.
I asked Dan the question earlier, I can't remember the answer. Maintenance, building and grounds. I asked you that one, but I can't remember what the answer was. You already told me. I should have deleted
I
it.
assume it's the cost of supplies.
We
Oh,
just talked about that, so I
Okay.
haven't asked John.
Oh, that's right,
but I
okay.
can.
so that's an outstanding question that we're gonna just find out exactly why there was an increase as high as it was there. School, we just obviously have the one number in, busing. I highlighted VOTEC, was that a final number?
Mhm.
That was a final number, okay. All right. Any questions in school, just while we're there? Okay. Doo. We did have, if we go down to line 712, that was another question line item that Dan, you were gonna, I think, find out for me as well. Other charges and expenses on tree. All the way down to snow. Okay, 728, you're already
Yep.
ahead of me. So we have to kind of have the snow discussion. We keep kind of batting it around a little bit. So typically, we've budgeted $50,000 for as long as we can all remember. It's been $50,000, and we know that that's a very unrealistic number. We've always just made it up with free cash. We want, Brian suggested we really work towards getting closer to a more accurate number, but I think it's gonna be baby steps. Because again, you'd like to get there, but then do you have the money to get there? So the first stab at a little bit more of a realistic, and it's by realistic, I mean a really little bit more, is 135,000, bringing it from 50 to 135. We don't have to do it this year. We still can manage it the way we've been managing it, through free cash. It's the one area we can do that. So again, I think this is probably one of our numbers that we have a little flexibility on. As of right now, I took out the increase, the $84,000 increase, and leaving it at the 50,000. So I think, again, this is something that we're gonna probably make a little last-minute decision and last-minute call on, of we gonna try and move that number up and more appropriately up. So as of right now, we have it still at the 50,000. And I think we'll just have to kind of see where we land and see if it's gonna stay that way, or if we can start to make some incremental moves on it. Fleet maintenance, so we're back at DPW. So again, this is a line item we had a lot of discussion with John at the meeting on. Dan has since had additional discussion with him. He basically said, let us know where you think it needs to be. So we did. Leave it to me, leave it to Dan, I'm gonna give you an answer. So we've reduced that line item, that one repair and maintenance equipment, by $35,000. And I know they've been running, this year they're saying they're running, they're running high on it, but, I think it was probably a little too much of a jump too fast, and I think we all kind of felt that when we had the conversation. So, Dan did speak with John about it, and I don't think he was happy, but,
Yeah, I mean, I think he would like to have more, but I think it's still a 10% increase year over year. And if there's, justification for that equipment repair and maintenance needs to happen on a go-forward basis, we just need to see the supporting details to that to support the increase.
yep. So is everybody comfortable with that adjustment?
Yeah, it's still more money than the previous year, right?
Mm-hmm. It is. Absolutely. Where am I going down to?
We have a question on 817, which you asked me this evening, so I'll answer it tomorrow.
All right, so, oh yes, so,
Okay, we didn't highlight these, did we?
no, well, I actually am taking those off. So after a discussion with Brian before this meeting, so Dan had gone through water and has made some recommendations. It ultimately isn't, because of the water being an enterprise fund, ultimately is not going to help us in the end in the bottom line. But it's still, we should still look at these line items that are questioned and get some clarity on them to see if, even if they should be what they are, or should they be slightly reduced. So I think that's gonna be an ongoing discussion.
It'll be an ongoing discussion, the major one being the bank service fee. It was a line item that was put in the budget tied to the bonding associated with the wastewater treatment plant. It reduces on an annual basis, but it's been level funded, so we need to reduce it to what the actual expense is, and Brian's gonna check with Phyllis on that.
So more to come on water. And do- Oops, I highlighted that and I shouldn't have. I knew the answer.
Shouldn't
I knew the answer to that.
Okay.
Just to refresh everybody's memory, because I immediately did the old, oh, what is this? Highlight. Oh, and I went back and I knew. So last year, Chris actually zeroed out his office supply line and paid for it through
Grants.
his, for the,
Grants from state aid.
yeah, I think he paid, I think it might have been state aid. I thought state
I
aid.
think it was state aid.
Yeah, but basically in order to meet it, so basically he's putting that money back in his budget, so. you know. So that's not really an issue. Historical Commission. All right, so we talked with the Historic Commission. They had requested 2 increases. One, an increase of their general supplies, whatever we want to call it, from $1,859 to $2,500. I think that's probably very reasonable. Again, we're talking change on the floor. And then they had asked for $2,500 for project funding. I'm not sure we talked about it in that meeting
No, we
with her. We did not, okay. What Brian had unearthed, get it, short version, unearthed, is that, I know.
The trust fund.
Yeah, that the Historic Commission has a trust fund. And it was about $26,000 for exactly this type of work.
Oh, great.
So we don't really need to give them the $2,500 line item for projects because they now have access to this trust fund of $26,000.
Does that show up on the town financial statement somewhere? This $26,000 account that magically appeared?
Usually there's a separate statement for
Yeah.
trust funds. They don't go on like
Those
the
are really
town
great.
statements, but it'd be like a back schedule for like the
Back,
proprietors.
like an appendix?
Must turn over in the committee.
It should, at least. I don't know that it does.
There is a whole list of the reserve accounts, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
the problem is that they changed the financial standards this year, so the reporting is, please help me, restricted, temporarily restricted, accounts now.
Yeah.
It's different than it used to be, and I'm not fully up to speed on that, but we have to show those on the accounts now, what's restricted, donor restricted, and This is
Oh,
donor
yeah, for the
restricted.
nonprofits, yes.
Correct.
Like
This is donor restricted to the graveyard.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which is exactly what they
Yeah,
want to
exactly
work
what
on,
they wanna do, yeah.
ironically.
Yeah.
And because these committees tend to have a lot of turnover and, you know, get it, historical information. Yeah.
Historically, they have a lot of turnover.
We'll be here all night.
We'll be here all week.
So I think it was safe to say that we could back that 2,500 out.
So is that how you uncovered it when you went through to find out
I
the
don't-
donor restrictions and everything?
Brian uncovered it. How did you
Is that
uncover it?
when you found out
I
when you
actually
were
went
trying
through
to?
the list of accounts and said, what's this for?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, and then interestingly, I was in a meeting when I found it, and John Haynes was sitting next to me, and it's a gift from his mother,
Really?
State.
so he
Yeah.
knew all about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's what the fund,
Yeah.
so who
Yeah.
managed like that fund, like what are they, who manages it, you know, how do they get a return on it?
Well, the problem, this comes back to the prudent investor problem,
Hmm.
it's invested 2.36%.
Yeah, so who does
Whoopee.
it? Is that you do that? or
Treasurer.
who- The treasurer does that?
Right, but we're restricted to the legal list of approved investments
Oh,
by the
from
state. So remember when I talked about one of the articles we wanna put forward is to
Yeah.
allow us to pick our own investments.
Yeah, like Fidelity or something,
Right,
right? Yeah.
something, an index fund, well, we wouldn't be bragging about it today, but,
For the long haul, no, we're in
Yeah.
it for the long haul here, right?
Yeah.
So, that's a great idea.
I highlighted the 7,000. I don't know why. I think because it just,
do we
I
actually
think you
get-
rounded it down and I felt
Yeah.
bad.
I guess my question is, did we actually get an actual request from the Arts Lottery Council on what they wanted?
No, we don't get the request.
Cause I see 7433, then
Oh,
7433, and then I threw 7,000 in, so we can put that back if you want to.
I actually, well, back up there. I don't know. In the last 3 years, I do not believe the Finance Committee has received a request. I don't know if somebody else has.
Okay,
I know they're active and that
they do something.
they do, actually, in the last year and a half, they've done a lot more than in years past. They've been very, very active.
So I think we need to find out what that real number is then. Not that $433 is gonna kill us.
It'll be
See, I was gonna put it back in just because I hate taking them, you know, you don't have to take it away. All right, so debt council.
I think was that, is
I
that it?
think that might have been it.
I think so. Yep,
That's it.
Wasn't
okay,
it?
now
Yeah.
you wanna go to the summary sheet.
Yep, so over the summary. So,
Not too bad.
no, it's not bad at all.
What are we at, like 180?
So we started this evening at 410,000 deficit. With the changes that's been outlined by our chairman, we're down to a deficit of 87,149.
With some outstanding questions still, so,
The insurance question could solve this
big one.
problem.
yep,
um,
absolutely.
You know, so,
Some potential tweak or two to DPW still. You know, we still have a little elasticity in the reserve. So, I don't,
Sorry,
No, we're all
I couldn't see. I see what I was going to ask.
okay,
I'm good.
look there, it's easier.
That is true.
But, so I think given, this is probably, you know, I didn't want to say that because I didn't want to like, say anything. But I feel like this is, I think this is very reasonable for where we are in the process. Like I said, we have a few little things to kind of tweak and work on, but I don't,
I
That's
can't
less
go-
than-
I'm not feeling horrified at
Less
the
than
moment.
1%, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty
Yeah.
good.
So I think from a process perspective, I think we have like a few more things we can work on and tweak. And then could probably get this out to everybody kind of ahead of when we think we're gonna, you know, do our votes. Everybody does one more eyeball of it, and then I
Especially if
think,
we can get the health insurance number,
Exactly.
because who know, I mean,
Yeah, that could go
Yeah.
either way. so
cross
that-
that
Yeah.
could.
I think by, so let's kind of talk real quick about the schedule of what we were talking. So we just did a little brainstorming session with the calendar of, you know, backing into everything. We basically have booked ourselves every Tuesday for this month. So we're at the 10th here. We're talking about so let's just say we have the 3 more meetings, 3 more Tuesday meetings. Next week, I think we could, for the most part, go through and do voting on all of the articles, almost all of the articles. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to vote on the budget article, we won't be able to vote on capital, but we could probably go through and knock off the majority of the articles next week. The week after, on the 24th, I'm thinking if we're in pretty good shape, that we might be able to actually vote on the operating budget at that point,
On the 24th?
on the 24th. I think it's safe to assume we'll have the insurance number by then. I think we'll have any other answers. I feel confident that we'd be in a pretty good place to do voting on the 24th there. And then on the 31st, we're hoping that capital is done at that point. And then Dan can give us an update on capital as well. I mean, we know roughly where it's gonna be, but it'll be just kind of that final update and the final number for us. So actually, depending on where we are, we might hold our final vote until that, but I don't think we have to. I think we can still vote the budget, the operating budget, and then anything else we have to clean up. So we would kind of hold the 31st as kind of our last, get the capital, then vote the capital article and any remaining
Just everything.
stragglers that come through, that we might have to vote on. It'll be kind of a cleanup meeting. And then we hand it over to Brian, and Brian is good to go to legal, and then for the
Yep.
moderator review.
Yep.
It's like so early. It feels so early.
Something wrong?
I know.
Well, it's 'cause we have money.
Well, and it's because
Timing's good.
last year was so the opposite.
Yes.
We were like doing it to the last minute.
Wow.
So this is how it should go, I think. So with that,
And I think part of our recognition is that next year, some of the things that we counted on for revenue aren't gonna be here. So, short of changing the paradigm, next year is going to be a very tough year.
Yeah.
We're gonna get some pushback because the schools are gonna want more than 1%, so it's gonna be a very difficult year. And I think we should start talking about that as soon as town meeting's over.
Well, who sets the staffing for the police and the fire? Is that some kind of state regulation that they have to
No.
meet?
You decide that.
We decide that
Meaning as a town.
as a town.
Yeah. One of the things that you wanna, you come into what are called, minimal standards of coverage. So, how many people does it take to run the station? 3 or 4, like on the fire department. And if you slip below a certain level of staffing, so for example, you staff for 4 and you fill to 3, meaning somebody calls in sick, you don't call somebody in.
Right.
But if somebody calls in sick when you have only 3, you have to call for help.
Right.
And if you do the OSHA standard for firefighting, 2 in, 2 out. So if 2 people enter the building, 2 people have to be outside of the building. So there's 4 right there. So staffing levels are not dictated to the town, but very definitely there are standards.
Right.
In the police situation, it comes down to a matter of safety, considering the size of the town. You don't send a lone officer into a domestic disturbance. So that's 2 cars, 2 cops. So you can't, and you have 4 precincts in the town, you can't basically have only 2 cars going. If you get an automobile accident, and you're blocking 2 ends of the street,
Yeah.
who's helping the
Both
accident?
sides, right.
So there's a practicality in terms of staffing. And unfortunately, it isn't the old days where we could send a couple of cops out and they could really do all the paperwork they needed to do while they were sitting in their cruiser. Standards for reporting, for technology, for grant writing are overwhelming in terms of paperwork. So we take a really good cop, he gets promoted to sergeant, he gets promoted to lieutenant, he gets promoted to deputy chief, the last thing the chief's doing is real police work. He's shuffling paper. He might as well be the town administrator, because that's all he's doing. He's not really, doing,
Who gives them the paper to shuffle?
the state mandates certain requirements of reporting, one of the things, if you really want an eye opener, is open up the standard operating procedure for the police department. There's a procedure for everything. And it's all, that's dictated to us as being a certified police department, which we are moving towards. The amount of paper that generates out of the building is incredible.
So,
Good.
with that, any other questions or thoughts, or any other areas you feel like we haven't touched on enough that we need to revisit?
We're close, yeah, it's good,
Getting there,
good work.
getting there, yeah.
Well,
Excellent. Okay.
So we do have to just tighten up these numbers.
So I gave you guys a copy of the minutes for February 24th.
Is that the pile that I just stuck under my
Yeah,
desk, because I
because
thought I
it's
just,
Oh,
didn't know what
yeah,
I was
sorry.
doing?
Oh,
Can you hand those down?
sorry. They stopped
I
at you.
She's got all the copies. You have a copy for Dan too. Is there an extra one that way?
Oh.
No, I got one.
And I guess
Okay.
another question I would have is like, so all these different additional compensation is like 9 or 10 things, so that gets negotiated by the town and the union whenever they negotiate. So do those ever come off, or like can the town not afford to pay some of that stuff?
Well, all contracts are subject to funding by town meeting,
Right,
but we would be probably charged with an unfair labor practice, and
well, I mean, it just seems like that's a lot of 10 different things to pay for, you know,
Yep.
comp.
Well, and
I
it's
mean,
different by department too, so you're gonna see things like fire and police are gonna be much more complex than town
Fire
clerk's
board.
office,
Yeah, I mean,
you
I'm
know.
not so much about the money, I mean,
Because-
people deserve to get paid, but my point, my thing is like, why is it so complex? to
Well, some
have-
of it comes into what you talked about with staffing is calling it staffing ratios.
Yeah.
If they have to call somebody in because to cover a sick, or to cover vacation, or to cover holiday, so whereas,
Do they use
in the
call
cloud-
firefighters for that?
yeah, we have some, yeah,
They get called in when there's someone sick,
right, well, if they're available.
if they're
Yeah.
available, right?
but you gotta pay them,
Yeah.
right? So all those line items are to cover those shifts to make sure that they're at the safety levels of staffing.
So when you
So a
have,
lot of it
like, and
too.
you should definitely take a peek at the, like, the police contract, because your point is well taken. There is the pay,
Just, yeah.
then
And
there
there's
is
a
the
million
shift
things.
differential, because I work the night shift, I get X number of dollars more. There's my uniform allowance, there's, education compensation,
Too much.
there's callback time, there's forced in time, and then, of course, there's literally overtime, which kicks in rather, we suck up a lot of overtime. And if you get a situation where at the end of the shift, you pull a car over, now you, and you make an arrest, you're on the books until you get that prisoner taken care of. So that could be another 3 hours. And it's not like I can just turn that over to another officer, you do
You
it.
gotta process it,
Correct.
right?
So if you commit a crime, do it at the end of the shift.
Right, that's what they probably make most of the arrests, right?
No, they
It just
don't
seems,
wanna.
it just seems overly complicated to just pay people, right? You know,
It is.
It is.
Pay
It
them
is.
11 or 12
There's
different ways,
18
yeah.
different categories to pay a police
That's too
officer
much, that's too
under.
much. Yeah,
Yes.
I would say that's too much.
You're absolutely correct.
Oh, we're not gonna solve that yet.
Okay,
Move to
so,
approve the minutes of February 24th.
Second.
Second?
any discussion?
Aye.
Excellent. All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, actually, Joe, you need to abstain
Oh.
on this one. Absent,
You didn't have to.
no, didn't
actually.
have to.
I'm reading the minutes, right?
You can vote whether you were here or not.
Yeah, we already, I always read that we couldn't, no?
Can.
Well, if you read the minutes, right, that's what you're doing.
Great. Any other questions or business?
You asked me that question, I still haven't gotten you an
It's-
answer.
well, I think I
Never mind.
mean,
I'm okay.
You good?
I think it's a fairly simple dynamic.
All right, anything else?
I
Oh,
have- motion on the night, so I'm gonna list of things.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very
So if he
much.
gets- If he gets a set of number plate.